When you look at your hands, what do you see? I see decades of building, fighting, and surviving. These hands signed a $47 million deal, and they also signed the will that shocked my entire family. But more than that, these hands have kneaded dough at 4 a.m. when the world was still sleeping, wiped away tears when failure seemed inevitable, and shook with both fear and determination when I made the hardest decisions of my life. My name is Evelyn Granger. I'm 74 years old, and this is the story of how my own children tried to steal my life's work and how I made sure they'd never forget the lesson I taught them. This isn't just another family drama or business success story. This is about betrayal, redemption, and discovering that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to spill it. You're probably wondering how a widowed mother with no business degree built a $47 million empire from her kitchen table. Maybe you're curious about how someone survives their darkest hour and emerges stronger. Or perhaps you want to understand why my own children, the people I sacrificed everything for, looked at me with pity instead of pride. Well, buckle up, because this story has more twists than a corporate thriller, more heartbreak than a family tragedy, and more triumph than you'd expect from a woman society had written off as past her prime. By the end, you'll understand why sometimes the most important business decision isn't about money or market share or growth projections. It's about legacy, trust, and the courage to do what's right, even when it breaks your heart. But first, let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment that changed everything. Picture this. It's 1993. I'm sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by bills I can't pay and dreams that seem impossible. I'm holding a death certificate in one hand and a stack of final notices in the other. My husband Thomas just collapsed at 42 while mowing our lawn on a sunny Saturday afternoon. No warning, no symptoms, no goodbye. One moment he was alive and laughing. The next, he was gone forever. His life insurance barely covered the funeral costs, leaving me with nothing but memories and mounting debt. I had two teenagers who needed me to be strong when I felt completely broken. Travis was 15, already showing signs of the entitlement that would later consume him. Lena was 13, embarrassed by our suddenly reduced circumstances and angry at the world for taking her father. I had a mortgage that wouldn't wait for grief to pass, and exactly zero business experience. Just a dusty culinary certificate I'd earned years earlier when I thought cooking might be a nice hobby, and the kind of bone-deep desperation that either breaks you completely or forges you into something unbreakable. Most people in my situation would have crumbled. They would have sold the house, moved in with relatives, accepted charity with grateful smiles, and wounded pride. I understood that impulse. There were nights I lay awake considering it, wondering if surrender might be easier than the alternative. But I couldn't do it. Not for me, not for my children, not for Thomas's memory. So instead, I started cooking. It began with 5-box lunches that I prepared with shaking hands and fierce determination. Chicken salad sandwiches made with real mayonnaise and fresh herbs. Potato soup that simmered for hours until it was perfect. Lemon bars that reminded people of their grandmother's kitchen. I sold them to neighbors for $6 each. That first day netted me $30. Not enough for groceries, barely enough for gas, but somehow enough for hope. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Mrs. Henderson from down the street told her book club. The book club told their friends. Within a week, I was getting calls from people I'd never met, asking if I could make lunch for their office meetings or book club gatherings. Within 3 months, I was waking up at 4 a.m. to start prep work, cooking until 8, delivering by 9, and back in the kitchen by noon to prepare for the next day's orders. My kids helped. Well, Travis did, when he wasn't too busy with his friends or his part-time job at the local grocery store. He'd load coolers into the car without complaint and even helped me deliver to some of the bigger office orders. But Lena was already embarrassed by what she saw as our fall from middle-class respectability. She'd tell me it was humiliating to deliver food to her classmates' houses, that people were talking about us, that she wished I'd find a normal job like other mothers. I should have paid attention to that red flag. I should have seen how easily she could be ashamed of hard work, how quickly she could turn her back on the thing that was keeping us afloat. But I was too busy surviving to notice the warning signs. Fast forward 1 year, I'd completely outgrown my kitchen and scraped together enough money to rent a small commercial space in an industrial park on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much to look at, a concrete box that smelled like sawdust and industrial cleaning supplies, but it had commercial ovens, adequate storage, and room to grow. Most importantly, it had potential. I hired Maria, my first real employee, an out-of-work pastry chef with calloused hands and a warm smile, who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. She became more than an employee. She became my partner in those early days when every decision felt like it could make or break us. Then came the moment that changed everything. A nurse named Jennifer, one of my regular lunch customers, mentioned that her hospital was having problems with their current food service provider. The meals were terrible, the service was unreliable, and the staff was frustrated. She asked if I'd be interested in bidding for the contract. I remember sitting in my car outside Rosemont General Hospital, staring at the building and feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. This was it, the chance that could either launch us into real success or destroy everything I'd built. It meant more volume than I'd ever handled, higher health and safety standards than I'd ever faced, and a level of professional responsibility that kept me awake at night. But I took it. I walked into that meeting with a business plan I'd written by hand, wearing my best dress and carrying samples of every dish I knew how to make perfectly. I spoke from the heart about reliability, quality, and treating every meal like it was going to my own family. And it worked. Not just worked, it soared. By the time Lena graduated high school and left for college, we were serving 12 regular corporate accounts and catering dozens of events every month. I'd paid off the mortgage on our house, bought a reliable car that didn't break down every few weeks, and put both kids through school without taking out a single loan. I was proud of what we'd accomplished, proud of how we'd pulled ourselves back from the brink. Not bad for a woman who started with nothing but determination, a willingness to work harder than anyone thought possible, and a refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. But here's what I didn't see coming in those early years of success. Prosperity can blind you to the character flaws in the people closest to you. When you're fighting for survival, everyone pulls together. When you're successful, people start to think about what they deserve rather than what they've earned. By the early 2000s, Granger Culinary Services had become everything I'd never dared to dream. During those dark nights in 1993, we operated 2 fully equipped commercial kitchens, employed 60 full-time staff members, and held contracts with hospitals, universities, and major tech firms throughout Oregon. We'd launched a line of pre-packaged meals for busy professionals who wanted homemade taste without the time investment. Our annual revenue had reached levels that seemed impossible just a decade earlier. Travis graduated from business school in Seattle with honors and immediately took a high-paying job at an investment firm in Chicago. I was proud of his success, proud that he'd chosen to build his own path rather than simply stepping into mine. Lena came back home after college, not because she was passionate about the family business or excited about contributing to what we'd built, but because her job search in other cities had yielded nothing but rejection letters. I convinced myself that her lack of options might actually be an opportunity. Maybe working in the business would help her understand what we'd accomplished, help her appreciate the sacrifice and dedication it had taken to build something lasting. So I created a role for her, marketing director, a title that sounded impressive on business cards and in networking meetings. In reality, she oversaw one part-time assistant who handled our basic advertising needs and signed off on promotional flyers once a month. She came to work when she felt like it, rarely stayed past 3 p.m., and treated the entire operation like a temporary inconvenience she was tolerating until something better came along. Travis returned to Portland after his second divorce, bringing his 12-year-old son, Landon, with him. The divorce had been expensive and messy, leaving him financially drained and emotionally exhausted. I offered him the CFO position, thinking that having family involved in the senior leadership would strengthen the company and give him a fresh start. He accepted the role, but his attitude made it clear from day one that he thought he was doing me a favor rather than the other way around. He acted like his business degree and corporate experience made him naturally superior to the woman who'd built the company from scratch. He questioned my decisions, rolled his eyes during meetings, and spoke to longtime employees with a condescension that made my stomach turn. The painful truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Neither of my children loved the company. They didn't even respect it. They tolerated it because they saw it as an inheritance waiting to be claimed, not a living, breathing business that required care, understanding, and genuine passion. I told myself repeatedly that they'd grow into it. I made excuses for their lack of engagement, their casual disrespect, their obvious expectation that the business would simply be handed over to them, regardless of their contribution or competence. I was wrong about almost everything. The signs of what was coming started small, so subtle that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Skipped meetings with vague excuses about conflicting appointments, responses to my questions that were evasive or dismissive, changes in body language, in tone of voice, in the way they looked at me when I walked into a room. But then the signs became harder to ignore. Lena started bringing her lawyer husband, Brent, to client meetings and strategic planning sessions, despite the fact that he had no official role in the company and no relevant experience in our industry. She'd introduce him as a consultant or advisor, but I could see what was really happening. She was positioning him as a power player, someone whose opinion mattered more than mine. Travis began requesting increasingly detailed financial reports, asking for access to historical contracts, bank records, and vendor agreements that had never been his responsibility. When I asked why he needed this information, he'd give me answers about operational efficiency and strategic planning that sounded rehearsed and hollow. They stopped copying me on internal emails. I'd discover that meetings had been held, decisions had been discussed, and plans had been made without my knowledge or input. When I confronted them about it, they'd act surprised and claim it was an oversight. But it kept happening with increasing frequency. The most painful part was watching how they interacted with longtime employees, people who'd been with us for years and had helped build the company into what it had become. Maria, who'd been my first hire and remained one of my most trusted team members, started coming to me with concerns about how she was being treated by my children. Other employees began scheduling private meetings with me to express confusion about conflicting directions they were receiving. I found myself in the impossible position of having to choose between defending my own children and protecting the employees who'd been loyal to me for years. It was a choice I never should have had to make. Then came my 74th birthday party, an event that I now realize was designed as much to marginalize me as to celebrate me. They organized a lavish celebration at our main office, complete with catered food, champagne, speeches from employees and clients, and all the trappings of a proper corporate event. Lena presented me with an engraved gold watch that read, "To Evelyn Granger, founder and inspiration." The word inspiration felt particularly loaded, as if I was being honored for what I had done rather than recognized for what I was still doing. Everyone clapped and smiled and toasted my health and my legacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was attending my own professional funeral. After the party, as I was collecting the last of my things from my office, my assistant Iris came in with a folder in her hand. Iris had been with me for 5 years by then, hired away from a competitor who hadn't appreciated her intelligence and work ethic. She was the kind of employee every business owner dreams of finding: reliable, intelligent, proactive, and absolutely committed to the success of the company. She rarely spoke out of turn or involved herself in office politics, but that day she closed the door behind her with unusual deliberation. "Mrs. Granger," she said quietly, "there's something you need to hear, something I recorded accidentally, but I think you should know about it." She pulled out a small flash drive, her hands trembling slightly. "Lena and Travis met with a lawyer yesterday afternoon. I was working late in the conference room next door, and the walls aren't as thick as people think they are." My heart started racing even before I heard what was on that recording. Somehow, I knew that whatever she was about to play for me would change everything. Lena's voice came through clearly, calm and calculated in a way that chilled me to the bone. "We need to get her medically evaluated by an independent psychiatrist. If we can prove that she's no longer mentally competent to run the company, the board can vote her out and we can take control." Travis's response was more hesitant, but no less devastating. "I don't think she's actually incompetent, just outdated and stubborn. But you're right that we can't wait forever for her to step aside voluntarily." The lawyer's voice was professional and detached. "You'll need documentation of specific incidents where her judgment appeared impaired, board minutes showing erratic behavior, testimony from employees about concerning decisions." My own children, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, were planning a coup. They weren't just impatient for me to retire. They were actively plotting to have me declared mentally unfit so they could seize control of the company I'd built with my own hands. I sat in that chair for a long time after the recording ended, not crying, not shouting, just absorbing the full scope of their betrayal. Iris sat quietly across from me, giving me time to process what I'd heard. Finally, I looked up at her and said, "Thank you for bringing this to me. I know it wasn't easy." She nodded. "I've seen what this company means to you, Mrs. Granger. I couldn't let them blindside you." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea that grew cold in my hands, thinking about everything that had led to this moment: the early mornings, the financial struggles, the gradual growth, the pride I'd felt in building something lasting. And now, the realization that the people who were supposed to carry on that legacy saw it only as an obstacle to their own ambitions. I made a decision that night that would change everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Simon Sanderson. We'd worked together for over 20 years, and he'd handled everything from incorporation papers to major contract negotiations. He was sharp, discreet, and most importantly, completely loyal to me rather than to my children. "Simon," I said without preamble, "my children are trying to remove me from my own company." There was a long pause before he responded, "I'll clear my afternoon schedule. Come in as soon as you can." When we met, Simon laid out a comprehensive strategy that was both defensive and offensive. First, I would get an independent medical and psychological evaluation from a respected physician, not because there was anything wrong with me, but because we needed official documentation of my complete mental and physical competence. Second, we would commission an external audit of the company's performance under my leadership. If my children wanted to claim that my judgment was impaired or my leadership was ineffective, the numbers would tell a different story. And third, the nuclear option that I'd never seriously considered before, I would revise my will completely. "If they're willing to do this while you're still here and actively running the company," Simon said carefully, "what do you think they'll do when you're gone and there's no one to stop them?" That question hit me like a physical blow. I'd always assumed that the business would pass to Lena and Travis when I died. It seemed like the natural order of things, the way family businesses were supposed to work. But now I realized that passing the company to them wouldn't be preserving my legacy. It would be destroying it. "I want to make some changes," I told Simon. "Significant changes." Over the next several hours, we drafted a completely revised will. 60% of Granger Culinary Services would go to Iris Monroe, the woman who'd shown more loyalty and understanding of the company's values in 5 years than my children had in their entire lives. Lena and Travis would each receive 15%, enough to provide financial security, but not enough to control the direction of the company. The remaining 10% would be split between my grandson Landon, who was still young enough to potentially learn what the business really meant, and a foundation I would establish to help children in foster care. I also insisted on writing a detailed letter explaining my decision, not out of spite or anger, but out of a genuine desire to help them understand what they'd lost and why. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Simon asked, as we finalized the documents. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. 2 days later, I asked Iris to meet me at a quiet cafe downtown. I'd been thinking carefully about how to approach this conversation, how to explain what I was planning without overwhelming her or making her feel pressured. She arrived right on time, dressed in her usual professional but modest style, and I could see the concern in her eyes. She probably thought I was going to tell her about some crisis with the business or some problem with my health. "Iris," I said, after we'd ordered our coffee, "I've made a decision that's going to affect your life in ways you never expected." Her expression grew more worried. "Is everything all right?" "I've revised my will," I said simply. "When I die, you'll inherit 60% of Granger Culinary Services. You'll be the majority owner." She stared at me in complete shock, her mouth slightly open, unable to speak for several long moments. "Mrs. Granger, I don't understand. Why would you do this?" "Because you're the only person in that building who treats this company like something sacred rather than something to be exploited," I said. "Because you understand that success isn't just about profit margins and growth projections. It's about the people we serve, the employees we support, and the standards we maintain." She was quiet for a long time, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know if I can accept this. It's too much responsibility." "It's not a gift," I said gently. "It's a responsibility, and I wouldn't trust it to anyone else." She took a deep breath and nodded. "Then I promise you, I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of it." A week later, I decided to attempt one final family reconciliation. I invited everyone to dinner at my house, the same dining room where we'd shared birthday celebrations and holiday meals when the children were young. I cooked their favorite dishes, set the table with the good china, and hoped against hope that we might be able to find our way back to being a family. Lena arrived with Brent, but left her twin daughters at home, claiming they had school activities. Travis came with Landon, who gave me a genuine hug and seemed genuinely happy to see me. Iris arrived last, looking more like she was attending a business meeting than a family dinner, but I understood her nervousness. For the first hour, we managed to maintain the pretense of normalcy. We talked about weather, local news, Landon's progress in school. The food was good, the conversation was civil, and I almost let myself believe that maybe things could be different. Then Brent, who'd had several glasses of wine, decided to stir the pot. "So Iris," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "how's it feel to be the rising star, getting all the inside information from the boss?" The comment was clearly designed to make Iris uncomfortable and to assert his own importance in the family hierarchy. Iris went pale, but didn't respond. "That's enough," I said sharply. "No, really," Brent continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. "It's quite the Cinderella story, isn't it? Girl walks into a catering company. 5 years later, she's practically running the place." Before I could shut him down completely, my grandson Landon, sweet and innocent, and completely unaware of the undercurrents in the room, asked his father a question that changed everything. "Dad, is this about the global foods deal you and Uncle Brent were talking about?" The room fell into a vacuum of complete silence. I felt my blood pressure spike as I turned to Travis. "What deal?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Travis began stammering, his face flushing red. It's nothing, Mom. Just some preliminary discussions, nothing concrete. But Brent, drunk on wine and his own sense of importance, decided to double down. It's just business, Evelyn. Global Foods has made an excellent offer for the company. It would be a fantastic exit strategy for everyone. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. They weren't just planning to remove me from leadership. They were planning to sell the entire company to a corporate conglomerate, probably pocketing millions while destroying everything I'd built and throwing all of our employees out of work. And they'd been planning this behind my back, negotiating with buyers while pretending to care about the family legacy. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, but apparently none of my values. At Lena, who was staring at her plate and refusing to meet my eyes. At Travis, who was still trying to come up with explanations that would make this seem reasonable. At Brent, who was enjoying the chaos he'd created. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, let me explain. Travis started. Get out of my house, I repeated, louder this time. All of you. They began to protest, to make excuses, to try to justify what they'd done. But I was beyond listening. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. One by one, they gathered their things and left. Lena was the first to go, walking out without a word or a backward glance. Brent followed, still muttering about business opportunities and market conditions. Travis lingered, his face pale with shock, trying to find words that might repair what had been broken. Mom, I know how this looks, but if you'd just let us explain. There's nothing to explain, I said. You've made your choice. Now you'll live with the consequences. Only Landon remained, looking confused and upset by the sudden dissolution of what was supposed to be a family dinner. Grandma, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything, sweetheart, I assured him. Sometimes the truth needs to come out, even when it's painful. Iris had remained throughout the entire confrontation, sitting quietly in the corner and trying to make herself invisible. After everyone else had left, she started to apologize. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Granger. I never should have been here for this. Don't apologize, I said firmly. You're more family to me than any of them. That night, I sat by my bedroom window until dawn, watching Portland's sky gradually lighten and thinking about everything that had brought me to this point. The woman who'd started making box lunches in her kitchen 30 years ago could never have imagined that her greatest challenge wouldn't be building a business or surviving financial hardship, but protecting what she'd built from the people who were supposed to love it most. I knew what I had to do. The following Sunday, I called one final family meeting. I asked everyone to come to the house, including Iris, and I didn't explain why. They all showed up: Lena, Travis, their spouses, Landon, and Iris. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood in front of them, hands clasped, and took a deep breath. Over the last few months, I began. I've learned some painful truths about loyalty, family, and what this company really means to the people who are supposed to care about it most. No one spoke, no one moved. I've discovered that what I thought was loyalty was actually entitlement, that plans were being made behind my back, not just to replace me, but to sell everything I've built to the highest bidder. Lena started to speak, but I held up my hand. I've also learned who I can trust and who I can't. A month ago, I revised my will completely. When I die, 60% of Granger Culinary Services will go to Iris Monroe. Lena and Travis will each receive 15%. The remaining 10% will be split between Landon and a charitable foundation. The room exploded. Lena shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage. You're giving our inheritance to a stranger. Someone who's worked here for 5 years gets more than your own children. She's not a stranger, I replied calmly. She's the only person in this room who shows up early, stays late, solves problems without being asked, and treats this business like something that matters rather than something she's entitled to. Brent was on his feet now, too, pointing his finger at me accusingly. "This is insane. You think some employee knows how to run a $47 million company better than people with business degrees and real-world experience?" "I think," I said, my voice growing stronger, "that running a business requires more than a degree and a sense of entitlement. It requires understanding what the business stands for, caring about the people it serves, and being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself." They began shouting over each other, demanding explanations, threatening legal challenges, accusing me of everything from senility to manipulation. Through it all, Iris remained silent, her eyes wide with shock and what might have been fear. Finally, I'd heard enough. "If you're going to contest the will," I said, raising my voice above theirs, "you should know that I've had comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations. I've commissioned an independent audit of the company's performance under my leadership, and I've documented every conversation, every meeting, and every decision that led to this moment." The shouting stopped. They realized that I hadn't made this decision impulsively or emotionally. I'd planned it carefully, legally, and strategically. One by one, they stormed out. Lena was first, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Brent followed, still muttering threats about lawsuits and legal challenges. Travis lingered longest, his face pale and his eyes filled with something that might have been regret. "Mom," he said quietly, "is there any way we can fix this?" I looked at him for a long moment. This man who was my son, but who treated my life's work like a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. "That was your choice to make," I said, "and you made it." He nodded slowly and left, taking Landon with him. The boy looked back at me with confusion and sadness, and I made a mental note to explain things to him privately when the time was right. Iris remained, standing uncertainly in the middle of my living room. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, "but I hope you understand what this means." "I think I do," she said, "and I promise you, I won't let you down." The weeks that followed were difficult, but clarifying. Lena officially resigned from the company, sending her notice through email without any personal conversation. She couldn't tolerate working in a place where she no longer held the power she'd always assumed would be hers. Travis stayed, but everything between us had changed. Our conversations became purely professional, focused on quarterly reports and operational decisions rather than the personal connection we'd once shared. The warmth was gone, replaced by a careful distance that broke my heart even as I recognized its necessity. What surprised me most was Landon. About 2 weeks after the final confrontation, he showed up at my office after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder and a nervous but determined expression on his face. "Grandma," he said, "I want to understand what happened, and I want to learn about the business if you'll teach me." And so I began teaching him, just as I was continuing to mentor Iris. We walked through the commercial kitchens, and I explained how we'd grown from 5-box lunches to serving thousands of meals every day. We studied financial reports, and I showed him how to read the story behind the numbers. We reviewed client menus and vendor contracts, and I taught him about the relationships that make a business sustainable. Most importantly, I told him stories about the early mornings when I wasn't sure we'd make it through another month, stories about the employees who'd become like family, the clients who'd trusted us with their most important events, the small victories that had built into something lasting. He listened with the kind of attention his father had never shown, asking thoughtful questions and making connections I hadn't expected from someone his age. As for Iris, she absolutely blossomed in her expanded role. I began including her in high-level negotiations with major clients, strategic planning meetings with department heads, and even board of directors sessions. She listened more than she spoke, asked intelligent questions, and never once acted like she knew more than she did or deserved more than she'd earned. The other employees responded to her leadership naturally. She didn't demand respect. She earned it through consistency, fairness, and genuine care for the people around her. Clients began asking for her specifically, appreciating her attention to detail and her ability to solve problems before they became crises. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She was steady, reliable, and completely committed to the values that had built the company in the first place. One afternoon, about 3 months after the final family meeting, Iris and I were driving back from a successful presentation to a potential new client, a regional healthcare system that would represent our largest contract ever. "Mrs. Granger," she said as we sat in traffic, "I still can't believe you chose me for this. I keep waiting to wake up and find out it was all a dream." I looked at her, this woman who'd proven herself in every way that mattered, who'd shown more loyalty and understanding in 5 years than my own children had in their entire lives. "You earned it," I said simply, "and you remind me of someone I used to be." She was quiet for a moment. "Who was that?" "Someone who believed that work was more than just a paycheck. Someone who understood that building something lasting required sacrifice and dedication, and a willingness to put the needs of others before your own comfort." "I hope I can live up to that standard," she said. "You already have." As I'm recording this story, I'm approaching my 75th birthday. The company is more successful than it's ever been. Our employee retention is at an all-time high, and we're expanding into new markets while maintaining the quality and values that built our reputation. Lena and I haven't spoken since that final dinner. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that she started her own consulting business, though I don't know how successful it's been. Travis and I maintain a professional relationship, but the personal connection we once shared is gone forever. It's a loss that I mourn every day, even as I recognize that it was necessary. But Landon continues to come to the office after school and during summer breaks. He's learning not just about business operations, but about the values and principles that make a business worth building in the first place. And Iris has exceeded every expectation I had when I made the decision to trust her with my life's work. Here's what I've learned after 30 years of building a business and 74 years of living. Legacy isn't about who you're related to or who shares your DNA. It's about who shares your values, who understands what you've built and why it matters, and who you can trust to carry your vision forward long after you're gone. My children saw a bank account waiting to be inherited. They saw an asset to be liquidated, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. Iris saw a responsibility to be earned, a trust to be honored, and a legacy to be preserved. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Family doesn't ensure understanding. And sometimes, the people you choose to trust are more deserving of that trust than the people you're obligated to love. The hardest part of this entire experience wasn't the business decisions or the legal maneuvering or even the public confrontations. It was accepting that the children I'd raised, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, were willing to destroy what I'd built for their own short-term gain. But I've also learned that betrayal, as painful as it is, can clarify your priorities in ways that comfort never could. It forced me to look honestly at what I'd built and who I could trust to protect it. It made me stronger, more decisive, and ultimately more confident in my own judgment. I know I won't be here forever. My hands are more wrinkled now. My energy isn't what it used to be, and there are days when I feel every one of my 74 years. But when my time comes, I'll leave this world knowing that the company will survive and thrive in the hands of someone who truly understands what it represents. That's what real legacy is about. It's not about who you gave something to based on obligation or expectation. It's about who you trusted to carry it forward based on character, competence, and genuine care. And that, more than any business success or financial achievement, is what I'm most proud of. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have chosen family loyalty over business integrity? Would you have been able to make the hard choice when it became clear that the people you loved most were the ones most willing to destroy what you'd built? Let me know in the comments below. Because I think these questions matter for anyone who's ever built something they care about, whether it's a business, a family, or just a life worth living. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about legacy and trust and the difference between what we owe people and what they earn, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most important lessons come from the most painful experiences, and sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about family, loyalty, and what really matters in the end.